Oh,
Video starting.
yep.
Just missed that thing.
hmm
Right.
Okay, I believe we're on. Welcome those people who joined us and those who join us later on. This particular article is called Frederic Slater, a genius or mischievous. I was trying to be semi-poetic, and it was pretty poor effort. But the reason I said that is there's two stories about Slater. One that he's an absolute idiot, or two that he's brilliant. We're obviously of the opinion, the second part, that he's brilliant. But we've written this particular article for two reasons. Number one, in our next workshop, we're going to be sharing with people some of his work. And what we're going to try and do with the people we work with is we're going to try and compile some commentary, not just from me and from Evan and from Leah and the people around involved, but also from the people who come to the conference, because we're all dancing in the dark here. As I mentioned earlier, we are now in have possession of over 1,000 pages of his work. So, ladies and gentlemen, the article is primarily an introduction to the whole deal, and we want to sort of give a background setting. And yes, we have got some quotes from his paper in there, and you'll notice on the article we've got the cover sheet up. It's a bit rough, but that's what he put up at the time. Okay, let's look at the situation as it is now. I want to make a point. If you look at what mainstream say about Slater today, they've agreed as a cabal that he's a moron, an idiot, and crazy. What the trick is this, but if you go back through the dozens of press clippings Eric Bauer found as he wandered around the microfiche records of all the state libraries in this country, you will find dozens, and I mean dozens upon dozens of commentaries where the word Frederic Slater is used. And what people need to understand, in the 1930s when he was up all over the place, and not just in New South Wales, South Australia, West Australia, everywhere, not once in any of the commentaries is there a negative word offered against Slater. I mean, obviously today when people cover something that's a little bit sensational, they'll get a counterpoint viewpoint to balance it out so they're not accused of actually going over the top. Not once, anywhere, is there a negative word passed about Slater before 1939. So I want to make that point. If you were to make a Slater timeline, before the Second World War, it would be all complementary. From the Second World War until about 8 years ago, when we found the papers and we started bringing this back up again, it's a vacuum. And for the last 8 years, it's basically us and a few others saying he's brilliant, and all of the rest of mainstream saying this guy's an idiot, dismissing his sites and saying the whole thing's a beat up. Well, what I want to do, and what we did in the article, is we put down the critics' hit list, and we analysed the things that were said. Now, the first thing that took place is when mainstream found out about Slater, through us, they went and approached his family. Now, you've got to remember something. Slater died in the 1940s. Now, they were approaching a family 70 years past the point for commentaries about him. And that's got to be dodgy to begin with. But you need to understand something else. In Slater's notes, and I'm going to look occasionally at the article I've just written just to make sure I've got the quotes right. Okay, in Slater's notes, though, you've got to remember, he was saying stuff like this, and I want to make the point. Before the Second World War, how many experts were saying things like, sky heroes coming from space and were not born of the earth? How many were so openly apathetic and in awe of original history and were insistent that ancient Egyptians came to Australia in a sacred pilgrimage and that they got their wisdom from the Australian original people? How many people were saying that at that time? One. You've got to think of this too. And how would people react to somebody who was saying that at the time? And of course they would have thought, well, he's loopy. This is ridiculous. It's not true. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, what the family said about him was, oh, he was crazy. He was doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But then they would say one thing, and I've read this in the critics. they would say, but he did know about Aboriginal stuff. They use the word Aboriginal then. And you've got to make the point, in the 1930s, how many people did? Not many. And they admitted, oh yeah, it's crazy the stuff he's saying, but he understood Aboriginal people and Aboriginal culture. So you've got to balance that out. Another critique that was used often is they said that yes, he was the president of the Australian Archaeological Research Society, Research and Education Society, but they only had 12, 15 members, therefore that's got to be dismissed. What people need to understand until 1939, when Professor Elkin set up the first faculty for anthropology in Australia, in Sydney Uni, that was the first one anywhere, and that started in 1939. So what that means, ladies and gentlemen, it's very important we understand this, that what it actually means is that yes, there were about 12 to 15 people at the meeting, but how many fully accredited archaeologists were there in Australia at that time that got a degree in Australia? And the answer is none. You've got to understand that. That's a really important point. So when this criticism comes up, and then the second thing is, well, he's a ratbag and a nutter. Well, it's fine to say that in 60, 80 years after the event, but I want to make a point. I want to make a point, and I'm going to read an article here now, and I'm going to try and read it as best I can. Normally I get Evan to do this, but I'm going to have a go at it.
I'm here if you want me to do it.
Oh, yeah, yes, if you are here, would you come and do it now? Okay, Evan, I want you to read that and go through to that. Okay, off you go now.
As translator of the Aboriginal writings on the rocks, as revealed in the colossal pictograms at the Wallamai, I am pleased with the publicity that has been given to the paper read before the Science Congress. I think, however, that due credit is due to the explorers who did the field work and discovered them and sent the drawings to me to look at. It is more than a year ago that the first of the pictograms were discovered by a party led by Mr. W.J. Enright, solicitor of Maitland, former president of the Anthropological Society of Sydney, and well known for his work in collaboration with other scientists. With him was Mr. Roy H. Goddard, chartered accountant and authority on Australian Aboriginal artefacts, who did the drawings from the translations that have been made. Mr. Goddard is one of the delegates of the Sydney Anthropological Society at the Science Congress. The other members of the party were Mr. Carlyle Greenwell, architect of Sydney, who is at present in London. I submit that the work of these explorers / archaeologists is the proper word, has been brought to light confirmation of the origin of our native race, that our natives are survivors of the original race.
Okay, thank you, Evan. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to make a point here. If, as it said, this guy's a moron and an idiot, why is it, number one? Oh, by the way, they also said he never wrote a paper. This is about the paper he wrote that was received so well in 1937. Mr. Enright is a solicitor of Maitland, a former president of the Anthropological Society of Sydney, which, by the way, Slater spoke at the year before and was invited to speak there. Goddard is a chartered accountant. Carl Greenwell is an architect of Sydney, was present in London. And then you've got Fordham, who was the principal of Brunswick Valley Primary School. All of these people were working on site and handing their information to Slater. Are they all idiots? And these people, you take Fordham, all of his spare moments, whenever he got time off school, where was he? He was on site compiling this information for Slater. Now, my point is very simply this. If he's such an idiot, are these people idiots too? Because they must be. Because they invested time. They allowed him to mention them in different correspondence, and they were happy to work with him and did so continually until the war finished. Now, what's really interesting is the paper that he presented to the Science Conference in Congress in 1937 was cancelled by the Department of Public and Tropical Medicine based at Sydney Uni on the 8th of December 1938. I would start by asking how many people that are in that faculty for tropical and public medicine would have any skill in archaeology, and in particular in original archaeology and its meaning? Well, apparently they had complete skill because they cancelled the paper. And what we found is, if you read the letters that Slater was writing to Fordham, which I've read, you find it as the letters continue, and they go into 1938 and 1939 and 40, he starts saying to Fordham, don't trust the Australian Museum, don't trust Sydney Uni, and eventually what he said was, I'm going to rip into the people who came to the door of the farmer at the time, Bashford, and came there and threatened them. And soon after, by the way, they destroyed the site within a couple of days. Because what was going to happen, we know this was the case, is that Bashford didn't own his farm. And this is the war. And in the war, the government runs the show and can do what they want. And it's interesting because it was owned by the CBC Bank in 1939 in Sydney, but in 1940, it all fell into his hands after he destroyed the site, after the government wrote to him, after the government came to his house and threatened him. Once he destroyed the site, all of a sudden he came to a massive amount of money and bought his farm and owned it freehold. What happened there? We're reading between the lines, of course, but there are things there that don't make sense. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I think is really interesting is that as we go through this critiques of what he was supposed to have done wrong, do you know the one thing they never criticised? They never criticised one word in his letters because they've never seen them. They never criticised any of his written work because they never saw them. So what we're saying is we've got a scientist here that's a little bit loopy, a little bit weird. Never had scientists like that before make discoveries, have we? They've all been mainstream, conservative, never did anything odd. Come on. If you're going to criticise someone and say they're wrong, you need to look at the work they wrote and the research they did. Not tell me about what the family said and about the fact that they never wrote a paper, which they did. Not put up a picture of someone and say, that's Frederic Slater, doesn't he look like a weirdo? And it wasn't him. And the Courier Mail put a picture up and said, this is Slater. And we've put up the picture that the Courier Mail put up in this article, plus the picture of what he actually looks like. And you know what he looks like? A very conservative solicitor or architect. The sorts of people he was working with. And you've got to remember, why did he actually speak at the science conference? Why did he speak at the Anthropological Society in Sydney if he's an idiot? But according to mainstream today, that's what he was. Now, I want to get back to the reason why his family thought he was so bizarre. Are you still around, Evan?
Yep, I'm here.
Come back. Evan's now going to read from Slater's actually notes from chapter 1. And I've written an article about chapter 1. I've got you to read that, please.
A man in the beginning of his time had a higher sense of his duty to man in the development of life, which to him was the soul, than can be found in the cultured nations of 2,000 years ago or the nations of today. There has never been a time since mankind came into the world that civilization had not a place in his philosophy of life.
Now, could you just read the next chapter? In the next chapter, I've slotted in different segments of his quotes and put in my own words to explain to you what Slater has in this book that we found. And I think it's very important that everyone reads that for us, please.
And how could Slater know of such a controversial historical truths? Is it simply because primordial man could write, and in Australia this took place through what he called pictograms? Unfortunately, the engravings and paintings in Australia have been the disrepair of anthropologists and archaeologists. All they know are records, but the method of deciphering they failed to discover. For the access he's given to Dunlop's records of the first language, he was able to open the picture book and be able to correctly read and understand the picture language of an ancient people. And as an added bonus, Slater was willing to share this arcane wisdom, as the key will be found in these pages.
And well, ladies and gentlemen, to me, that's the most important part of the analysis of Slater's book, Scribes of the Stone Age, which we have a complete copy of, plus all these other papers that he wrote. And of course, the Courier Mail said he wrote nothing. Thousands of pages he wrote. The Courier Mail's wrong. They showed us a picture of Slater. It wasn't Slater. They said he wrote nothing. That is incorrect. They said he wasn't respected. There's so many articles about him in the 30s. All of that stuff that was written in the Courier Mail, I'm sorry to say this, the free press there was wrong in every area. What I think is very important is he is saying that the first person, humans, when they began, are more advanced and civilized than they are 2,000 years ago or today. Can you see why saying those sort of things in the 1930s is going to start to create problems? That is a real big issue. And I want to make the point, these pictograms in Australia, all of the ancient art engravings, he has the key for, and they will be found in these pages. I would think that is one of the most amazing stories, because he believes that this first language of pictograms went throughout the world. So he's saying that this manual that he's got, that is rewritten into these pages, can not only interpret all of the rock engravings in Australia, but throughout the whole world. Now, wouldn't you say, if someone was making claims like that, it would be best to check them out first before you decide to ask the family 70 or 80 years after he died what they think of him? And then to tell us, well, he's rubbish because only 15 people turned up at his meetings, when I guarantee you there would have been less than 100 people in the whole of Australia that even had an interest in our Australian Aboriginal archaeology. Maybe Egypt, yes, but not Australia. So those things are not false. In fact, to have people and have a society, which he was the president of, indicates to me that all the members of that society also thought the same way that all the newspapers thought, and all of those highly educated professional people who spent all their spare moments out in the country with him, working for him, they all thought he was legit. And now people that don't know him and didn't even read one word he's ever written have decided as a group that whatever he's got to say is rubbish. And here he is saying the key will be found in these pages. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you, if the key can be found in these pages, then this is one of the most important books that's ever been written on archaeology, if not the most important book, because it also includes the fact that the Sky Heroes, in his work, and we've got his paper, and in his paper that was published, then cancelled, and was presented to the Australian and New Zealand Science Conference, he said there it was enthusiastically received, and in it, in the reading he gave, he would have said, and he did say, because we've read it and we've got it, that Byami's wife was not born from the earth, was born from up there. And Byami's son, the one without a name, got onto a rocket ship, and there was flames at the back, and it took off and left the earth. That is what that gentleman was writing in the 30s. And no wonder his family thought he was weird. But you know, it's amazing. The family thought that. And he was also saying, oh, it's a shame I couldn't get this to Sir Grafton Elliott Smith, who was interested in this also. Because Sir Grafton Elliott Smith also believed the Egyptians were in Australia too. I suppose he must be loopy also and weird. The point I'm making here, ladies and gentlemen, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, particularly when the glass houses they're living in weren't even built in the 30s. So, we've got in 2 weeks from now, roughly, we've got a workshop taking place, and we're going to spend a lot of time looking at his work. We'll go on to chapters 2 and 3. We'll move a little bit further on, and then we're going to put up some commentary with this, and we're going to break this up section by section. And of course, there will be some sections that we will not be making public because they don't need to be made public. They are still secret business, particularly the words, and I've mentioned that before. So, ladies and gentlemen, new article up. I tried to keep it brief, but unfortunately I went around my 3,500 words as usual. But what I wanted to do with this article was to make people clear when they start reading this. I wanted to clear away the lies and the make-believe stories put up in the papers recently, the Courier Mail, and put up by mainstream archaeology. And I can tell you, mainstream archaeology went and met the Slater family and reported they thought he was an idiot. But they also reported the family said, but he knew a lot about original stuff. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that unless you are acceptable by mainstream in your manners and the way you present yourself, your work is faulty? If that's the case, then half the science that's ever been done and made, you better throw away. Because there have been some weirdos there. One that comes to mind immediately would be a guy called Tesla, wouldn't it, Evan?
Yep.
Tesla was considered mad by many people at the time and completely dismissed until recently, when people started to work on his work, and all of a sudden everybody knows the name Tesla. You go back to the 60s and the 50s when I was born, nobody knew he existed. Nobody. He had been ignored. He died penniless. His laboratory was blown up, more than likely by Edison, and all his work was stolen. It's the same story, ladies and gentlemen. And for quite some time, he became completely anonymous. And all his contemporaries said he's an idiot. And then, lo and behold, now his name is known everywhere. And he's spoken in hallowed tones when we speak about Tesla. And people say how intelligent and brilliant that man was. Well, guess what? There's two of them. He was doing things to do with energy and stuff like that. Slater, he was talking about the fact that the whole of our genesis, our evolution, is completely different. We weren't born dribbling in the caves, according to him. They were more advanced at the beginning than the cultured nations of 2,000 years ago or the nations of today. Had a higher sense of duty to his man and the development life, which to him was the soul. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're going to study in our next our workshop here, which is on in 2 weeks. And we will start mentioning Slater in our online conferences from now on as we start to make our way through the thousands of pages we've got there. Now, I think Evan's attached a link to the next workshop, and we will have another online conference coming up. And in both instances, we will start preaching and we'll start reading from his work. Now, down the line, I'd like to see that work published, and we're going to try and work around that. But family don't care. They think he's an idiot. Mainstream don't care. They've determined that he's an idiot. Man, same story for Tesla as it is for Slater. It's strange how that works out. And if you look at the word Tesla and Slater, do you realise if you mix the letters around and you take out the word R, you've got Tesla out of Slater? Just a coincidence, or maybe not. But it is interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Slater, take the R out and you've got Tesla. Tesla, put the R in and you get Slater. Maybe that's a coincidence, but I don't think it is. I think that's just part of what's called serendipity. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I tried to make this one a bit shorter than some of the other ones. Something to think about. I know last time I said, look, I know you won't read the article, but I really wouldn't mind if you read this one. Basically, because what it does is, I deal with all the critiques. I get rid of that, and we begin, and the last part of this is called an aperitif, and that's where Evan read from, and there's more that comes on further on. He claims that Australia was the base of all religions. He says that culture was taking place in Australia for 150,000 years ago, or at least. Guess what? We're only just getting to that date today. Jim Bowdler's got 120,000 years. Slater was saying 150,000 years at least. in the 1930s. This guy was way above the cut of anyone else around at the time. And as I said, we're going to start doing this piece by piece, and the first public airing of this will be on our workshop, which is on in about 2 weeks from now. And I would suggest, if you've got the chance, to come up and become part of history, because you'll be the first group to see this, and you'll take home some quotes. Ones we'll select, of course, and you'll have something to look at that gives you an idea where it's coming from, because we're going to start running off some of those pages. And for now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you, and I'm going to try, if I can. God, Evan, what do we do? Go to home? See, the damn thing doesn't work sometimes.